All right, Shabbos, say good morning, good morning. Let us begin. Begin by thanking Baruch Hashem, all of our sponsors for today's year, to thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Elul, Shendin Avram Kelman, for dedicating all the shiurim and drushos this month in honor of their son Yechiel's engagement and in memory of their parents Jerome and Bernice Kelman, Alexander and Frederica David, Zichronim Baracha. We thank Barak, Maya, and Sandy Hoffman, Dora Limas, and Avi Malamed for dedicating the Sherman drushos this month in memory of Ruvain Ben Emmanuel, Ayala and Sarah Steinberg, dedicating the Sherman drushos this month in the schus of Refuah Shalema for Shulamis Bas Susha, and Daf Yomi sharing the schus of Refuah Shalema for Yehuda Ben Michal. We thank our week of learning sponsors, Matt and Diane Marks, on the birth and bris, Baruch Hashem, of their grandson Yehuda Yeshaya in Lakewood, New Jersey. May he grow in Meretz Hashem to become a Ben Torah, to go from strength to strength. Admei v'esim shanim tovos. Mazel tov. Well, so with that, let us begin. We have a lot to do today. Baruch Hashem. Today's daf is Nun Zayin 57, but we are picking up on Nun Vav Amud Beis, and we left off. We actually got a little bit into the sugya, but just for the sake of keeping it a little bit easier, let's begin at the 2 dots, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12 lines down from the top. But it's all right. Don't worry. We're gonna move today. Meretz Hashem. So let's remember again. So in yesterday's daf, we spent the bulk of the day focusing on the position of Rabbi Elazar ben Azar. Of Rabbi Yehuda. And Rabbi Yehuda speaking about the idea about the way to diminish a ksuva. So we'll get to the halacha l'maisa with that as well. Comes along Rabbi Meir and the Mishnah. Rabbi Meir says anytime you try to diminish a ksuva, his lashon was kalapoches lebesula ulamana. Anytime you try to diminish the amount of a ksuva, ultimately again it makes it into a beilas znos. Okay, so let's analyze this. To which the Gemara says, so kalapoches afilu betina. Suppose you remember again. Rabbi Meir says like this. Now remember, diminishing the amount of a ksuva, if you hold that ksuva is da'araisa, as we will discuss, ultimately again it's called masna amasha kasuv batorah. This is called making a tanai which runs contrary to halacha. We have a principle. Anytime you make a tanai that runs contrary to halacha, what is the halacha? The tanai is batal. The tanai doesn't work, right? Which makes sense. You can't make a condition that runs contrary to biblical law or even to rabbinic law, as we're going to see. So halacha l'maisa, here's what's interesting. Even if you diminish the ksuva, right? Even if you diminish it, but at the end of the day, so the tanai doesn't work. But l'maisa, so the ksuva is still intact. Yet, Rabbi Meir holds that it's ki'ilu you're having a be'ilas znos. So what's the pshat? So listen to this. Afilu b'tina alma kasavar tina batal. So Rabbi Meir holds the tanai will be batal. The tanai to try to diminish the ksuva will be batal. The isla, and therefore she has the full amount of the ksuva. The chayvan the amrla less leich, but since he said to her you don't have it, lo samchadaita. We'll say now this is incredibly fascinating. Lo samchadaita means she's not fully cognitively committed to this marriage, or not fully cognitively comfortable with this marriage. Therefore, the havile be'ilas or be'ilas znos. Therefore, the bia is a bia znos. Suppose say this is a fascinating idea where Meir is introducing the concept of essentially, if a woman is uncomfortable or ambiguous or unsure about some element of the marriage, there's not a complete buy-in to the marital process. And if there's not a complete buy-in to the marital process, then what? Then there's something potentially wrong with the marriage. And if there's something potentially wrong with the marriage, then what? What effectively is the bia? What is the bia? It's a bias nos. Fascinating idea. So the Gemara says as follows. So also if you take a look at Rashi just quickly, kalapoches afilu betina, midelo tana kol besula she'in la masayim va'amana she'in la mana harizu be'ilas nos shmamina dahaki yashmuinan shafa pishu govel basov de'in tano kayim afilu hachi kevan de me'ikara asni kari la be'ilas nos bishum de mishas bia lo hava samcha daita aksuvasa. So I will say, this is the incredible idea. Rabbi Meir is holding, when you try to diminish the amount of a ksuva, ultimately, again, it doesn't work. You can't diminish it. But Lamaisa, she doesn't necessarily know that you can't diminish it. Therefore, from her perspective, she now has a diminished ksuva. Because she has a diminished ksuva, therefore, again, according to Rabbi Meir, lo samcha daita. So lo samcha daita means she's not bought in. She's not bought in, and her failure to be fully bought into the marriage ultimately undermines some element of the marriage, and therefore the bia itself could be called the biasnos. I'll give you a contemporary example of this in just a moment. So I'll give it to you right now. So let's listen to this. You know, when a couple gets married, husband is not permitted to use a ring that has any stones, engravings, anything like that. Right, the wedding band that you get married in. Afterwards, you could buy whatever wedding band you want. I don't mean for a man. I mean what a husband gives to his wife. It has to be a plain metallic band. It could be white gold, yellow gold, platinum, plastic, not plastic, right? It could be whatever you want it to be. But Lamaisa, no stones, no engravings. What's the reason for that? I want to give my wife a beautiful diamond wedding band under the chuppah, right? So we'll say, here's the concern. The concern is that ultimately, again, the wife may think that the wedding ring has one value, when in fact it has a different value. Well, if she's entering into the marriage under the assumption that the wedding band is worth X, but it's really worth Y, there's a potential problem with her smichas das, with her commitment, her transactional commitment to this marriage. So to avoid that, we use a plain band, and that's why, again, under the chuppah, the Mesadri Kiddushin will ask the chassan if the band is worth a pruta. As long as it's worth a pruta, she understands her das is, I'm getting a ring that's worth at least a pruta. It's going to be worth more than a pruta, but at least there's a basic level of smichas das. That's Rabbi Meir's issue. So we'll say, yet we learned according to Rabbi Meir that anytime you make a tanai that runs contrary to biblical law, so the tanai is batal, habit rabbanon tuno kayim. But one second, Rabbi say, ksuva, we're assuming that, I jumped the gun a little bit, but we're assuming right now that ksuva is drabanon. So Rabbi Meir, it's true, you can't make a tanai which runs contrary to biblical law, but you can make a tanai that runs contrary to rabbinic law, and that tanai should be binding. Because Rabbi Meir ksuva daraisa. Okay, so that shuts that down. Rabbi Meir holds the ksuva daraisa. So, which is fascinating. Rabbi Meir holds ksuva daraisa. Therefore, if you try to diminish the value of the ksuva, you are effectively being masna amasha kasav batorah. You are making a tanai which runs contrary to biblical law, and if you do that, to know batal, your tanai will be batal. Okay, incredible. I'll point out how we paskin halacha lamaisa, which is going to be a little bit different. Tanya, Rabbi Meir says, so we'll say, okay, so now we're just recoding this. Bryce is recoding Rabbi Meir. So Rabbi Meir holds, if you try to diminish the value of a ksuva for a besula for amana, effectively it's a biasnos. So we'll say, so remember, now we understand Rabbi Meir's statement. If you try to diminish a ksuva, does it work? Does it work? No. Why? According to Rabbi Meir, masna masha kasuvator. Meir holds ksuvas daraisa, and if you try to make it tonight, which runs contrary to biblical law, and we'll say, by the way, no different than if I go ahead and I say, I'm making a neder not to put on tefillin. Anytime you go ahead and you stipulate something that runs contrary to biblical law, your stipulation, your neder, your tanai is batal. And therefore, again, Meir says the tanai is batal, and ksuva is da'araisa, so therefore your masna masha kasav batorah. But there's a problem now with your marriage because your wife doesn't feel secure that she has a ksuva, and therefore it's a biasnos. That's right, Meir. Rabbi Yossi Omer Rashai. Rabbi Yossi says, yes, you can. You could diminish a ksuva. By the way, not only that, but if you take a quick look at Rashi, Rabbi Yossi Omer Rashai, va'afilu al peh nami tino kayim. Wow. Rabbi Yossi says, not only can you diminish a ksuva, but what? You can do it verbally. You don't even need like a shover. You don't need a receipt. You don't need a document to diminish a ksuva. So Rabbi says he's arguing on 2 points we're going to see. Number one, Rabbi says you could diminish. Number two, you could do it verbally. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Ratza kosev lebesula shtar shamasayim hu kosev lo iskabalti mimcha mana ulamana mana vi kosev lo iskabalti mimcha chamishim zuz. So both say, so this is our machlokes. That's Rabbi Huda from our Mishnah. Rabbi Huda says you can diminish a ksuba, but in order to diminish a ksuba, what do you need? What do you need? A document, a shover, a receipt. So Rabbi say, three-way machlokes. Rabbi Meir can't diminish a ksuba. If you try to do it, it doesn't work and it compromises the integrity of your marriage. Rabbi Yossi, you absolutely can diminish a ksuva. Not only that, you could do it verbally. Rabbi Huda, you can diminish a ksuva, but you need to do it contractually, right? You need to do it in writing. You need to write, remember again, wife will write to the husband, essentially a receipt. His kabalti. I received part of my ksuva payment, even though what? Of course, she's received nothing. But Lamai says she's writing as if I've received my good. Does Rabbi Yossi really hold that you could diminish a ksuva even verbally? Or minhi, we learned, or minhu asked kasha, ein osin ksuvas isha metaltalin tikun ha'olam. But it's interesting. So you can't go ahead, right? Remember again, a ksuva creates a lien against all of a husband's property. Right now, halacha lemaisa, what a husband can do is he could be miyachid karka. He could identify like a piece of land and say your ksuva is leveraged against this, thereby removing the ksuva lien from everything else, assuming that land is valuable enough. What you can't do, says the Gemara, is go ahead and pledge metaltalin for ksuva, movable property. Why not? Mipnei tikun ha'olam, for the benefit of society. So what does that mean? So the Gemara says, Rashi says, "Mipnei tikun ha'olam shema yovdu o yifchesu demehen." See, I will say the concern always with metaltalin is what? Concerns with metaltalin is they lose their value. Now, of course, real estate also can lose its value. Here's the difference with real estate, which is interesting, which is often cyclical. So remember, again, we see this even contemporarily. So something may lose its value now. But again, real estate market always rebounds. I don't know. We'll assume it always rebounds, right? It always rebounds. So the idea of here the Gemara says is we don't want the husband using metaltalin for the ksuva because lamaisa they more easily lose their value. Says Rabbi Yossi, "V'chi ma tikun ha'olam yesh bazu." Rabbi Yossi says, I don't understand. What's the problem here? What's the problem? What tikun ha'olam is there? V'halo in ksuvin upochasin. After all, he says they're not set, and they diminish in value. Rabbi say, we're not exactly sure. The Tana Kamanami ain't osin kamar. So ultimately, again, what is Rabbi Yossi adding? Rabbi Yossi seems to be agreeing. The Tana Kama says you can't use metaltalin for ksuva because they lose their value. Rabbi Yossi comes along and says, what kind of tikkun ha'olam is this? After all, metaltalin lose their value. He's saying the same thing. So the Gemara says, "V'halo Tanakamanami eino sekamar elalav hachi kamar." Rather, this is what it must mean to say. When is this so that you can't use metaltalin? B'shelo kibal alav achrayis. Oh, they will say, when can't a husband designate metaltalin for a ksuva? When the husband doesn't take responsibility. In other words, if a husband says, "Listen, wife, you have a 200 zuz ksuva. Here's 200 zuz of movable property." But say a good example of movable property would be like animals, right? Animals. Here's sheep, right? 200 zuz of sheep, or whatever, or 200 zuz of watches, or 200, whatever it is, right? So if the husband says, here's the metaltalin, and he's not mekabel achrayis, in other words, he doesn't take responsibility, should they diminish in value to make up that difference, that's when you can't be miyached metaltalin for a ksuva mipnei tikun ha'olam. Aval kibal of achrayis osin. But I will say, if a husband accepts achrayis, right? He says, "Here's your metaltalin," and I understand metaltalin could diminish in value, so I'm accepting upon myself any diminution of value to go to make it up to you. That should work. That's the Tanakama. If he's makabel achrayis, you could use metaltalin. Vas Rabbi Yossi the meimar ki kibal of achrayis amai osin valo in ketsuvin upochsin. So I will say, but Rabbi Yossi still says, I don't understand. Even if the husband is mekabel achrayis, we shouldn't let a man use something volatile for his wife's ksuba. In other words, it's very nice he's mekabel achrayis. And I will say, remember, kabbalas achrayis, accepting responsibility for something, is only as good as what? Right? The person accepting responsibility. So Lamaisa, the whole point of ksuva is to give a wife a sense of financial security that to a certain degree does not rely on her husband's will, right, or goodwill. So the Rabbi Yossi says the problem over here is if you allow a husband to go ahead and be miyached mitaltalin, just set aside mitaltalin for the ksuva, it's very nice that he's makabel achrayis. That's beautiful. That's wonderful, right? We'll put it in his Rashko biography. But lamaisa, at the end of the day, you're still now, she's dependent on him. Masha'enkin Rabbi Yossi says, when there's a lien against the estate, there's a lien against real property, that doesn't depend on him making her whole. So we'll say that's the machos. So Rabbi Yossi comes along and says you can't use metalton under any circumstances. Now we'll say the Gemara says now remember, here's the problem. Rabbi Yossi was just of the opinion that what? What did Rabbi Yossi just say beforehand? Rabbi Yossi says a husband could diminish his wife's ksuva, right? And what? They could even do it verbally. So now Rabbi Yossi are all concerned about safeguarding the ksuva to the point that even if the husband is mekabel achrayis, you can't use metaltalin. And yet, you hold that a ksuva could just be diminished with a verbal agreement. Now, obviously, when we're talking about diminishing a ksuva, that of course requires the wife's consent. The point that Rabbi Yossi is making is even with the wife's consent, over here we don't want metaltalin being used. Yet you could diminish a ksuva verbally, right? Just like that. So what's going on over here? To which the Gemara says, Uma hasam the dilma pach sichayish Rabbi Yossi. In the case of metaltalin, maybe they will diminish in value, and yet Rabbi Yossi doesn't allow the use of them for ksuva. Here, where the husband is looking to diminish the ksuva, right? Rabbi Yossi is not concerned at all. In other words, Rabbi Yossi is hyper concerned in a case where maybe the ksuva will be devalued, that you can't do it. And yet, in the case of diminishing the ksuva, where it's definitely being diminished, he allows you to do it verbally. Hachi hashta hasam lo yada detachil. Hacha yada vikamachla. There's a big difference. In the case of the Bryce that we quoted before of diminishing a ksuva, she's a party to this transaction. She could say no. She could say I don't want my ksuva diminished, and that's the end of it. But here she's allowing for it. So look, if the husband has her consent, right, and this is happening again as a transaction between the two of them, she has every right. And therefore, again, she could do it verbally. In the case of the metaltalin, I will say, there's doubt that hovers over this. What's the metaltalin worth now? What is it going to be worth at the time of the ksuva? Is the husband's word really reliable? That's why Rabbi Yossi doesn't like that case. Another interesting case was both a very interesting case here. The sister of Rami Bar Chama got married to Rav Avia, top of Nun Zayin. Irkas ksuvasa. Oh, we'll say what happened? They lost their ksuva, or she lost her ksuva, because the ksuva, the truth is supposed to be held by the woman. No different, right? No, in other words, she's the creditor. So it's just like any other transaction, right? Ultimately, creditor holds the loan document because that's how he collects the debt. A ksuva has to be held by a woman. Its whereabouts have to be known by the wife at all times. Bless you. So Erkas ksuvase. So the kala lost her ksuva. Also coming to Rav Yosef, they came before Rav Yosef. Amr lahu, Hachi Amr Rav Yehuda Amr Shmuel, Zudiv Rav Meir, Avacham Omrim, Masha Adam es Ishto Shtayim v'Shalosh Shanim below Ksuva. So I'll say very interesting. So Rabbi Meir is, remember again, Rabbi Meir is the one who says that if you tamper with the Ksuva, then it's a Be'ilas Znus. So therefore, according to Rabbi Meir, I'll say, if you lose your Ksuva, what happens? You've got a big problem. Because L'maisa, again, in other words, you have to replace it immediately. Because living with women without a Ksuva is Be'ilas Znus. But the Chum say, you could go ahead and wait 2-3 years. And we'll say, wait, what's the expression of waiting 2-3 years, right? When have you ever heard? You could wait 2-3 years to take care of this, right? So we'll say, so what the Chum seem to be saying is, listen, do you need a ksuva? Yeah. Is it an emergency? Not at all. Just make sure you get it taken care of. So the Gemara says, fascinating. So Amrli Abaye said, 1 second. So therefore they come before Rav Yosef, and Rav Yosef essentially says to them, listen guys, you got to take care of this, but it doesn't have to be today or tomorrow or next year for that matter. Just make sure sometime to get it done. So they said to him, Amrle Abaye said, V'hamrav Nachman Amr Shmuel, halacha Rabbi Meir. Abaye said to Rav Yosef, but Rav Nachman said, halacha follows Rabbi Meir. Also remember again, Rav Meir is of the opinion that halacha l'maisa, if you don't have a ksuva, it's be'ilas nus. I'm sorry. V'amar Rav Nachman Rosh Halacha Rav Meir Big Zeirosov. Ihachis Rav Yosef heard this and he said, if that's the case, Zil Kasovla, go and write her a ksuva immediately. So Rabbi say, so two important pieces of halacha l'maisa here. Number one, if you lose your ksuva, which absolutely happens, if you lose a ksuva, there is a special document called a ksuva de irkisa. It's a different text. And in that ksuva, it's written, this couple got married on so-and-so date. They came before us, and they told us they lost their ksuva. Here's the new ksuva. But again, I will say, we paskin like Rabbi Meir, namely, a man is not permitted to live with his wife without a ksuva. So halacha l'maisa, if a woman loses her ksuva, she doesn't know where it is. Couple are not permitted to live together until a ksuva is written. So halacha l'maisa, again, there's some type of confusion. I don't know what the ksuva is. I don't know what happened is. Wife always has to know where a ksuva is. If you don't have it, you need a new one immediately. Now the post can bring down, so listen to this. So what happens? It's 10 o'clock at night, right? We decide, let's reminisce about the wedding. Pull out the wedding album, watch the video, and then let's look at the ksuva, right? So now it's 10 o'clock at night, can't find the ksuva. So what do? First of all, don't call the rabbi. That's number one, right? It's 10 o'clock at night, right? So I'll say, but lamaisa, right? Lamaisa is ksuva's daf nun zayin with aleph. So I don't have the ksuva. So what says the poskim bring down? There's a simple, quick fix until you get the ksuva. You write your wife a check, because the ksuva essential or ask her for the checkbook back so you could write her a check, right? And I'll say so lamaisa is something fascinating about this, which is that a ksuva is an IOU. A check is effectively an IOU. It could work the same way as well. So the poskim bring down that if a husband takes a check and essentially writes his wife a check, again, the value of a ksuva fluctuates, but let's assume for our purposes today for $25,000. I'm going to have a check for $25,000. Now, there's not $25,000 in the account. That's okay. That actually doesn't matter, because just like in a ksuva, at any given moment there might not be enough money in the estate to set, but it's an IOU. So a husband giving a wife a check for a ksuva amount could be a good stopgap measure in the event that she can't find the actual ksuva document. That allows them to continue to live together, and again, plugs the hole ultimately until they're able to go ahead and write the replacement ksuva. Good. Let's go back there. Kiyas Rav Dimi, Amr Rav Shimon ben Pazi, Amr Rav Yoshua ben Levi, Mishum bar Kafra. Machlokes betchila. Suppose it's very interesting. The machlokes between Rabbi Huda and Rabbi Yossi, right? That ultimately, again, Rabbi Huda says that halacha l'maisa. That remember, again, say it's the Torah machlokes. Rabbi Meir is not part of this machlokes because Rabbi Meir holds essentially you can't diminish a ksuva. You can't diminish a ksuva. You can't touch the value. The machlokes is Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Huda. Namely, Rabbi Yossi holds that you could do it even verbally. Rabbi Huda holds that you could do it, but it's got to be done in writing. So now says the Gemara, the machlokes between Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Huda, machlokes betrila, is only in the beginning. Now we don't know what the beginning means yet. We'll see what this means. Aval basof l'divrei hakol eino mocheles. But at the end, then everyone agrees that she cannot go ahead and forgive part of the ksuva. We'll say first wide line 57a nun zayin umedal. Rabbi Yochanan says bein bezu machlokes. Rabbi Yochanan says no. It's a machlokes both betchila and basof. They both say we don't know yet what betchila and basof means. I'm Rabbi Avo. So Rabbi Avo said, I heard in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, the honor of Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi lo palginan adadi. So I will say, so in reality, I heard that this is now Rabbi Avo. Rabbi Avo holds, I heard that Rabbi Yochanan are not really arguing. How so? My betchila to come Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi. What's ultimately again the tchila that Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi is talking about? Tchilas chuppah. It's talking about the beginning of the chuppah. Umay sof. What's the sof? Sof bia. Sof bia means at the end of the first act of bia. The chika amina ana bein bazu machlokes. And when I said that they argue in both cases, both betchila and basof, I was using different definitions. Tchilas chuppah. My definition of tchila was the beginning of the chuppah. The sof chuppah, and at the end they sof. Excuse me. So thank you. Sof was the end of the chuppah. The havi tchilas bia, which is the beginning of bia. And I will say, because again, remember, the marital progression ultimately, again, is chuppah and then bia. Kiyasir Rabin, Amr Rav Shimon ben Pazi, Amr Rav Shimon ben Levi, Mishum bar Kafra, Machlokes lebasof. The machlokes is only in the end. So we'll say, remember again, we've now effectively cut Rabbi Meir out of this picture. Because remember again, Rabbi Meir is saying that you can't tamper, you can't diminish a ksuva. If you try to do so, it doesn't work. The only thing it does do is erode the level of cognitive commitment to the marriage. This machlokes now is Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Huda, who hold that you can forgive a ksuva. The question is, how can, or you can diminish, how can you forgive it? How can you diminish? Rabbi Yossi, verbally, Rabbi Huda only in writing, and now there's a machlokes as to when is the window of forgiveness, right? At what point can you diminish the ksuva? So the Gemara says, so Amar Rabbi Shimon Bazi, Amar Rabbi Shimon Levi, Mishum Bar Kafra, machlokes lebasof. The machlokes is only in the end. Aval betchila divrei hakol mochalas. Everyone agrees in the beginning she has the ability to forgive some part of the ksuva. Rabbi Yochanan says bein bezu machlokes. Rabbi Yochanan says no, both betchila and basof there is a machlokes. Amar Rabbi Ava says lididi mefarshli minid Rabbi Yochanan. In the right, I lididi. According to me, I understood the statement of Rabbi Yochanan. That Rabbi Yeshua and I don't really disagree with each other. What's the sof that Rabbi Yeshua and Levi is talking about? Sof chuppah. That means the end of the chuppah. Umay tchilas chuppah. And when I said bein bezu machlokes, that there's machlokes in both, what does that refer to? Tchilas bia v'sof bia. Okay. Papa, ilav dam Rabbi Avo, ledidi mifarshli minid Rabbi Yochanan, the Rabbi Shimon Levi lo palginan adadi. So Rabbi Papa says, had I not heard that Rabbi Avo said, I heard explained to me that Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Shimon Levi don't really disagree. Hava amina, Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Shimon Levi pligi. I would have thought that they are arguing. Rav Dimi Rabin lo pligi. My sof to come Rabin, sof chuppah. Because ultimately, what's the sof that Rabin is referring to? The end of the chuppah. Umay tchila, what's the beginning? Tikkun Rav Dimi. Tchilas bia. Umay kamash balan. What are they arguing? Or what is it teaching us? Hakamash balan. The pligi tre amorai atayma din afshayu. V'lo pligi tre amorai aliba dechad amora. And it's coming to teach us that when two amoraim argue, they're more likely arguing on their own svaras. In other words, they're disagreeing on their own personal positions and not disagreeing about what another Amora said. So I will say, I know we did that quickly, but just to kind of sum this up. So what the Gemara is trying to highlight over here is as follows. You'll see why I'm doing it quickly in just a moment. The halach is going to reject this entire premise. So I will say, so essentially what this whole machlokes was cutting out Rabbi Meir from the picture. I've got Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Huda about the ability to forgive part of a ksuva. Rabbi Yossi, you could even do it verbally. Rabbi Huda, you could only do it in writing. What's the machlokes? The machlokes is there a window of forgiveness? Is there a forgiveness window? That's the machlokes. So we'll say, why did I do it quickly? Because how do we pass in halacha l'maisa? We pass in like Rabbi Meir. So we'll say, listen to the lashon of the Rambam. The Rambam says in Hilchos Ishus, Parak Yud Beis Halacha Ches, Hisna ima lifchos meikar ksuva, Osha kasav la masayim omea ikar ksuva v'kasav lo sheniskabla mehem kach v'kach v'hilo niskabla. So we'll say, here the Rambam says, a husband makes a side agreement with his wife that he's not going to give her the full ksuva. I know you're entitled to 200 zuz, I'm only going to give you 100. Or she writes a receipt, right? My husband gave me 200 zuz. I'm sorry, right? My husband gave me 200 and I gave him back 100, right? I forgive 100. So either way, in other words, either they're reaching an agreement that she's going to settle on a ksuva for 100 zuz, even though she's entitled to 200, or she gets a ksuva for 200 and she writes the receipt back for 100. How does the Rambam paskin? To no batal. The Rambam paskins, there's no such agreement. Shekala poches lebesula mimasayim ula amana mimea hare biilasa biilas. They both say the Rambam paskins like Rabbi Meir, ksuvas daraisa, and therefore halacha l'maisa. If you try to diminish the ksuva, it is masna amashak. Or the truth is, it doesn't even have to be. Actually, I take it back. Even if you don't hold of ksuva daraisa, what we still hold in this case is tina o batal. Any t'nai to diminish the value of the ksuba simply does not work. And if you try to do so, Bilasa bilasnas. So both say, now remember, bilasa bilasnas doesn't mean you're not married. You're married. You're married, right? Because again, remember, marriage is not dependent on ksuva. But lamaisa, you have a problem. You have a problem that has to be addressed. So if you try to tamper with the value of the ksuva, ultimately any t'nai you try to do to that effect or any arrangement you make is going to be batal, halacha lamaisa, and you have to write a new ksuva, because if you don't, you have a certain level, a commitment issue with your marriage. Good. That's what Rambam Paskins, I will say. I'm sorry? So we're going to see, that's a machlokas. We have not yet resolved that yet. We're going to get to that. We've seen that the Gemara has kind of like dangled that in front of us a couple of times, but we have not yet seen a resolute ruling on that. We're going to get to that. Says the Mishnah. Let's go weiter. Says the Mishnah. So we actually referenced this at the beginning of, all the way at the beginning of Kesuvos. Now we're going to delve into it a little bit. So we'll say, listen to this. So remember, here's the timeline. Erison, Ruvain and Rachel do Erison, right? So Ruvain gives Rachel an item of value. Hariat mikudeshas libet tabasu gidas Moshe. So Mazel Tov, Erison. So we'll say, so now let's say after Erison, they did not go ahead and set a date for the wedding, right? Because remember, Erison is only the tchilas, the beginning of marriage. They can't live together yet. So Lamaisa, now they haven't set a date for the wedding. So I'll say, so now what happens? Now Ruvain says to Rachel, okay, Rachel, let's get married. From the moment that Ruvain says to Rachel, let's get married, what happens? She has 12 months to prepare herself for the wedding. So I will say, so it's interesting. See, this is changing our paradigm a little bit, because up until now, we've always been used to this model of the Talmudic model of a year between Erusin and Isuin, but we kind of thought that the clock automatically started with Erusin. What the Mishnah is introducing us to is, the clock starts when the husband says to the wife, let's get married. In other words, you would think that isn't Erusin kind of a statement of let's get married? So Erusin is a statement of halachically, but Erusin is more than a statement of let's get married. Erusin is we're married. Mishatava means the husband says, I want to actually plan the date of our wedding, right? I want to actually plan the wedding. The moment he says, I want to actually plan the wedding, that starts the clock. And now a Basula has 12 months to get herself ready. Look at Rashi for just a moment. No sin lebasula. Rashi says, "Man leknisas lechoba miyom shetava habal la'achar shekidsha la'asya eskechopa lahachin tachshiteha." So we'll say, so ultimately, again, so a basula, we're going to see that when a woman got married for the first time, there were certain pieces of jewelry, certain accessories that she had to get, that she had to prepare for herself. So Lamaisa, we give her a year. Now, both say, so again, just to be clear, the Mishnah is saying the 1 year clock begins as of when? Begins at the time of Tava. When he tells her, I want to get married. In other words, let's schedule the wedding. So the Gemara says, Kshem shenosnin. I'm sorry? This is after Erusin. This is after Erusin. Erusin happens, right? No date for the wedding. Now, after Erusin, husband says, let's plan the wedding. Let's make the date. The moment that's what the Mishnah calls tav'ah, right? Tav'ah li naseh. So there's erusin, and then tav'uha li naseh. That's lashon of the Mishnah, right? Mishetava habal. So mishetava now he says, I want to get married. In other words, it sounds strange. They're already at erusin. In other words, I want to plan the wedding. So from the moment he says, I want to plan the wedding, she has 12 months now to get ready for the wedding. Lefarnei says that's ma. Ukashim shnostin leisha. The same way that we give her time, we give the man time to go ahead and get ready as well. We'll say, let's say, right? So here, let's just play it out. Reuven does Erusin with Rachel, fine. Now what happens? 2 weeks later, he says, okay, I want to now plan the wedding. She says, great, I'll be ready in a week. He's like, whoa, right? Wasn't expecting that one, right? So let's say, so again, he needs time. Now, why does he need time? We'll say, so look at Rashi. Lefarnis atzmo b'tzarch isud v'chuppah. Now, we'll say, remember, it's going to come as a shocker. Who used to pay for the wedding? The chassan. Right? In other words, let's say, so, right, the chassan used to pay for the wedding. Right? So Lamaisa, again, let's say now the Kala says, I'm ready to go. And he says, well, I need time. So I'll say, so now the Mishnah says the same way we give her up to 12 months, so the Mishnah we give him up to 12 months as well. All of this is for a first wedding because the assumption is there's much more preparation needed for a first wedding. When almana only gets 30 days. So again, I just want to be clear on the timeline over here. There's eight, right? So case number one is Besula, first marriage. Ruvain does Erusin. The clock, the 12-month clock does not start with Erusin. The 12-month clock starts when? I will say one word, Tava. What does Tava mean? Reuven says to Rachel, again, I really want to complete our marriage. In other words, Nisuin, I want to have the wedding celebration. The moment he says that, 12-month clock begins. She gets 12 months, he gets 12 months, which means even if one of the parties doesn't need 12 months to be ready, the other one is entitled to the full 12 months. That's case one. Case two, Reuven's marrying Rachel, but Rachel's been married already. She's a divorcee, she's a widow. So now same case. Reuven does Erusin with Rachel. Mazel tov. Now, a week later, Reuven says, Rachel, I'm ready to plan, I want to get married. I want to get fully married, let's do the wedding celebration. Now, in the case of an almana, she only has 30 days. Only 30 days. And I both say, why does an almana only have 30 days? Look at Rashi, about 7 lines about Rashi. See, I will say, because an almana, or a grusha for that matter, have been married already, therefore what? They already have many of the accessories and adornments. They have the jewelry, they have the stuff already. So because of that, they're ready to get married much sooner. Good. So therefore, an almana only gets 30 days. He gives manavalonis. We've seen all of this before. So we'll say, so now let's say, either case, the allotted time passes. So we'll say, so now let's say again, first marriage. Let's go with first marriage case. Reuven's marrying Rachel. Fine, they had Erusin. He tells them, let's get married. Fine, the clock starts. 12 months come. He gives manvalon isu, and then he get married. So for some reason now the wedding didn't happen. So I said we already saw this sugya, right? Let's say again for some reason now Reuven's not ready to get married. Ochlos mishalo. Now we'll remember again from the beginning of Kesuvos. He now has an obligation to support her. V'ocheles b'truma. And if he's a Kohen, she consumes truma. So I will say, so once the 12 months elapse for a basula, or 30 days for an almana, and let's say again, Chassan doesn't do his part and marry the Kala, the support clause is triggered, and he is obligated to fully support her. And if he's a Kohen, she eats truma. Rabbi Tarfon says, no stin laha kol truma. And I will say, let's go back to this. So now let's say Reuven's a Kohen. So now Rachel, after 12 months for a basula, after 30 days for an almana, has the ability to eat truma. How much truma? So Rabbi Tarfon says, she could eat all truma all the time. Rabbi Akiva Omer mechza chulunu mechza truma. Rabbi Akiva says no. He's obligated to fully support her, but she gets half chulin, half truma. And Rabbi say the reason Rabbi Akiva says that is because there are going to be days in which she's tmeya, and when a person is tmeya, they can't eat truma. So Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Tarfon also knows she's going to be tmeya. It's right. Rabbi Tarfon says she'll just sell the truma and buy chulin. Rabbi Akiva says, why do that to her? Just give her some chulin, give her some truma, that way she's good to go. Fine. Hayavam eno ma'achil b'truma. So we'll say, this is very interesting. We'll say, let's say the following case. Rachel's married to Reuven. Reuven dies without children, right? So now Reuven has a brother Shimon, and now Shimon's going to go ahead and do Yibum. So now Rabbi says, so now here's the issue. Rashi says, Ovir hayavam eno ma'achil b'truma, ba'oda shomeres yavam v'tamei afigmar. So also what we're going to see is something very interesting. Apparently, if a woman is waiting for Yibum, when she is a shomeres yavam to a Kohen, that relationship does not allow her to eat truma. It's not entitled. We'll discuss the parameters of that in the Gemara. Va'afilu kulan bifnei habal. So we'll say now, what's this case? So now take a look at Rashi. Rashi says over here, did I skip something? Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I mean, thank you. We'll say, let's say again, so in this case over here, we'll say, we're going to see over here, this case of the Yavam means like this. Let's say, Lemaisa. Well, okay, so here's the case. So also here's the case. Let's say again, she has 6 months. Remember again, Reuven does Erusin with Rachel, then goes ahead and what? Then goes ahead and passes away, right? I'm sorry, before he passes away. He says, let's get married. So now what happens? 6 months into the 12 months, he passes away. So now she's a shomeres yavam. She's waiting for yibum for Shimon. So Lamaisa again now we'll say a year goes by, 6 months with Ruvain, and now 6 months waiting for yibum. Ultimately, again, halacha Lamaisa. Even though we said what happens after 12 months if she doesn't get married, what happens after 12 months? Support clause is triggered, and if husband is a Kohen, she gets truma. That's not true in this case. It's not true in this case. So I will say, so even if, let's say again, it was 12 months minus 1 day with Ruvain, then Ruvain dies. Now she's waiting for Yibum for Shimon. So now a day goes by, now she has a full year which she's been waiting for marriage. She still can't eat truma. Bifnei Yavam, also the Gemara says, so Yom Echad Bifnei Yavam, O Kulam Bifnei Yavam, Chas Yom Echad Bifnei Abal. Or I will say maybe she was only 1 day with her husband, waiting for the husband, and then the rest of the time with the Yavam, Eino Ocheles Betruma. She does not eat truma. In other words, Rabbi says, we're going to see, what the Mishnah is essentially saying is, the only time an Arusa gets to eat truma is when it's 12 months that her husband has not done nisuin with her husband. In other words, but any time that there's a disruption, let's say Ruvain dies and now she's waiting for Yibum, even though now a full year has elapsed, that year will not allow her to eat truma. Again, we'll discuss why all of this is. So Mishnah Rishona, this is all the initial halacha. However, Beis Din Shalachrein, or subsequent Beis Din said, I will say Amud Beis, subsequent Beis Din said, all of this is negated. Ein ha'isha ocheles betruma ad shetikanes lechuppah. I will say, now what we're going to see is, all of this was an initial ruling. The subsequent ruling of the Beis Din was that halacha l'maisa, a woman only eats truma when? Once she goes into the chuppah. In other words, there's no such thing as truma consumption during Eris. And I want to be clear, this second iteration of the halacha does not change the fact that if after 12 months of Erisin, right, if after 12 months of tava, of saying let's get married, husband doesn't, right, chassan doesn't marry the kala, chassan doesn't do nisuin, that doesn't change the fact that what? The support clause is triggered. He still has an obligation to go ahead and support her. What does the second ruling change? He has an obligation to support her. But what doesn't she get? Truma. Truma can only be received once she has entered into the chuppah. So I'll say, so where do we know this from? I will say, where do I know what from? Where do I know this ruling of the Mishnah that after Erisin, when the chassan comes and says to the kala, right? So again, Ruvain comes to Rachel and he says, okay, let's plan our wedding celebration. How do we know that now she has a year to prepare? Where do we get that from? So the pasuk says, Parshas Chayisara, Vayomer Achia v'ima, her brother, and Rabbi said, this is by Rivka Imenu. Vayomer Achia v'ima teshev hane'ara itanu yamim oasar. So Rabbi said, this is after Yitzchak realized that that Eliezer realized that Rivka was the wife for Yitzchak. He's ready to go home. They sealed the deal. Lavan agreed. Right, Basul's already dead. They sealed the deal. Now, as Yitzchak is getting ready to go, so what happens? Lavan says, Teshev hana'ara itani yamim o asar. Let Rivka stay with us. Yamim o asar. My yamim. What's yamim? Ilema treyome. So I will say, so maybe yamim means 2 days. That doesn't make any sense because I will say, then how would the pasuk read? Let the girl stay with us 2 days or 10 days. I will say the nature of people is mishtai inish hachi amrule treyomi amrlehu lo amrle asar yome. I will say in the world of negotiation, do people say, you know what? Let the girl stay with me 2 days, right? And if she doesn't, no, you're not going with 2 days. Fine. Let me ask you for 10 days. Whereas, I say that's not the way the world of negotiation works. First, you ask big. And then you settle. So the Gemara says, Ella, rather it must be, Ella my yamim shana. Rabosai, yamim must be a year. What Lavan was asking for Rabosai was, yamim o asar. How do you translate the pasuk? Yamim means, Lavan would say, let the girl stay another year to prepare herself for the wedding. O asar. Asar means what, Rabosai? Asar means what? 10 months. 10 months. Rabosai, dichsev yamim tehei geulaso. Because Shabbos ultimately, again, we see the word yamim, meaning a year. Where do we see this? Shabbos is actually quite fascinating. This is by the halacha of a home in a walled city. See, Shabbos say normally the halacha is when you sell a home, the first year you can't redeem it, subsequently you can. When you sell a home in a walled city, the halacha is just it's actually fascinating halacha. You have 1 year to redeem that home. If you fail to redeem that home in the year, then what? You are never able to redeem it. And by the way, never means never. Even during Yovel, that home does not come back to you. But just parenthetically, why is that? It's incredible. The Sefer HaChinuch says something fascinating. He says walled cities were typically border cities. Border cities are the first line of defense for the country. In order for the defense of the city to work well, the residents have to know the city and the residents have to know each other. If you have constant turnover in walled cities, you put the security of the country at risk. It's fascinating. Therefore, the Torah Kedosha said that halacha l'maisa, you have 1 year to redeem your home. But if you don't redeem your home, that's it. We'll say, but our purpose is, what do you see? Yomim tiegulasa. What do you see? Yomim means 1 year. So now we'll say, by the way, I find the word yomim in the context of marriage. Lavan is saying to Eliezer, let Rivka stay here. Yamim o Asur, to prepare herself from the wedding. So I don't know what Yamim is, but I know what Asur is. Asur is 10. So it can't be days, because then Lavan is asking for 2 days and then 10 days. That doesn't make any sense. It can't be weeks, right? So therefore, Yamim must mean a year. And again, I have a raya. Yamim by redemption of a home in a walled city. So from here you see that a woman is given 1 year to prepare for her wedding. Ve'ema chodesh, maybe it means a month. Dichsiv ad chodesh yamim. Right, we see this phrase chodesh yamim, so maybe yamim means a month. To which the Gemara says, Amri, done in. So we'll say in that case, it would mean, by Lavan, it would be yamim, he's asking for a month, and if you don't give me a month, at least what? Give me 10 days. To which the Gemara says, no. Amri, done in yamim stam, ve'in done in yamim stami, yamim shnema ben chodesh. And we'll say, here's the difference. Right? The difference is that if we can make the drasha from just the plain yamim, that's obviously better than making the drasha from chodesh yamim. Chodesh yamim has a modifier to yamim, but the beauty by yamim, by redemption of the home in the walled city, it's just a plain yamim. Therefore, we'll say rather make that lima. So we'll say that is our makar. So the fact that again in Parshas Chayisara, Lavan is asking for yamim by redemption of the home in a walled city. We see yamim meaning a year. From here, we see that a woman is given a year from the time that her husband tells her, I want to plan the wedding celebration in order to get ready for the chasana. Incredible. Amar Rabbi Zera, Tana, Kitana, Ben Hio Ben Avi Yecholin La'akev. I will say, by the way, this sugi is incredibly important, and it sheds light. I will say, remember, whenever we're learning about, we know that Midda Araisa, a father has the ability to marry off his minor daughter. And the truth is, whenever we learn these sugyas of marrying off minor girls, it's incredibly uncomfortable. Incredibly uncomfortable. First of all, because I will say, contemporarily, it's unequivocally and wholly unacceptable, illegal, immoral. Now, understand, okay, so we kind of explain it away by saying, like, times are different. And that's true. It's true, different in society. This is a fascinating Gemara, because you begin to see that even though biblically certain things are permitted, Chazal themselves already had a discomfort. So watch this. Kitana, ben hi ben avi yechol la'akev. A kitana, let's say again a minor girl who's being married off, either she or her father can object to the shidduch. Can object. In other words, I was saying, the minor girl herself could say, I don't want to get married. And if she says that, at the end of the day, we listen to her. Now Rashi says, Yecholin la'akev milinase achetigadal. She can say, I do not want to get married. I'm a young girl. I want to wait until I reach adulthood. Now, granted, again, Talmudic adulthood is 12 and a half, right? So, but again, we could, societally, everything is different. But Lamaisa, the point over here is the Kitana has a voice. The Kitana has a voice. And she or her father could object to the Shidduch. So, Bishlama Ihi Matima Akva, I understand why the girl herself could object to this, because we have no interest in putting anyone into a marriage they don't want to be in. Ela Avia, it's incredible. Why should the father be able to object? After all, if the girl is good to go, right? The girl is a kitana, right? She's 11 and a half years old, the kitana, right? So she says, I'm okay. She's right, mature. I'm okay with doing this. Why should the father have the right to object to this? This is so profound. So the Gemara says, Savar hashtalo yada. My daughter does not know what marriage means. She doesn't know what marriage means. Lemachar memreda. Tomorrow she's going to leave her husband. Benafka. V'asya benafa ilai. And she's going to be my problem again. So in other words, in this case over here, what the father is saying is, Lemaisa, my daughter thinks she wants to get married because she doesn't understand the complexities or the issues of marriage. So she's going to get married today. Tomorrow she's going to leave. And the whole thing is going to be my challenge once again. So therefore, either the father goes, it's so interesting. Like this Gemara would have been so helpful about 40 blot ago, just to help us understand like the mindset of Chazal with these things, because this is very helpful. This is very helpful. It doesn't change the fact that the mechanism exists, but it helps to shed some light about how Chazal feel about it. Rabbi Abba Bar Levi. So Rabbi Abba Bar Levi said as follows: In poskin ala kitana, la kitana. Both say it's incredible. Rabbi Abba Bar Levi says, we do not make arrangements. We do not make arrangements for a girl to get married when she is a kitana. Incredible. Rabbi Abba, both say, take a look at Rashi. In poskin, v'dafka below kiddushin, abab kiddushin bekatnos lo ad shetigado v'tomer ploni rosa. So also the idea Rabbi Abba says is, we do not make arrangements for a girl to get married when she's a kitana. Why? Because we want a girl to be able to choose her spouse. Right? We want her, this is her marriage, so we don't want to arrange anything when she's a kitana. Ava poskin ala kitana la'asiyah kishi gidola. Rabbi say, but what can we do? We can make arrangements. Rabbi say, we can make arrangements for as a kitana to get married as a gidola. In other words, so we could arrange certain things with her consent, while she's a kitana, to happen when she's a gedola. But the idea Rabbi Abba is saying is no kiddushin when she is a kitana. Poskin means we'll make arrangements. So we can make arrangements when she's a kitana, that she'll get married when she's a gedola. But at the end of the day, we want her to be a gedola when she gets married, and we want her to be able to actively say that she wants to marry this man. So the Gemara says, this is obvious. In other words, why would I have thought that I can't make arrangements when she's a kitana to get married when she's a gedola? The boss says, it's incredible. I would have thought that maybe the girl's going to get sick over this. Maybe this whole thing is going to cause her anxiety, even though she's not getting married now. But she knows we're making arrangements for her when she's a kitana, and that she's going to have to get married when she's a gedola. Maybe the anxiety of it is going to make her sick, and therefore halacha lemaisa, we shouldn't do it at all. Kamash no. Kamash Rabbi say. So by the way, this is incredible. So what you begin to see over here is that halacha lemaisa, the kitana herself could object. The father could object. What you begin to see is Chazal understanding the notion of marrying off a girl when she is a kitana is anxiety provoking for the girl. And ultimately, again, could make her sick. And therefore, again, there's even a havamina that maybe we shouldn't even arrange marriage for a kitana to occur when she's a gedol. So Kamash Malano, we're not worried about that. We're not worried about that because Lamaisa, she knows nothing's going to happen until she consents. She knows that nothing's going to happen until she says, Rot Sa'ani, that I want to marry this guy. She knows nothing's going to happen until she's a Gidola. But Lamaisa, such a sensitivity, the Havamina is, I wouldn't have even made arrangements when she's a Kitana. Kamash Malon, you can make arrangements. No Kiddushin when she's a Kitana. We want to wait ultimately again until she could consent, until she's ready. And she always has the ability to object to any marriage arranged for her. Such a different spin. So the Gemara goes right there. Amar Rav Huna, Bagra Yomecha b'niskacha. So we'll say now we're transitioning back towards the previous sugya of time. So we'll say, here's what we've established. So halacha l'maisa, for a besula who's getting married. So ultimately, Erisin, husband says, let's get married. She has 1 year from then. Almana, 30 days. We're now going to introduce, we'll say, a different dynamic. Rav Huna says, Bagra Yom Echad. See, here's what's interesting. All of these conversations are assuming that the girl, the woman who's getting married, is a nara. Fascinatingly. We're going to see now the halacha may be different for a Bulgar. So we'll stop over for today. We'll Emir Hashem pick up with the waiting period for a Bulgar. So Emir Hashem tomorrow. Shkoyach. All right, Chavra and Zoom, everyone have a great day. Wonderful to see everyone.
The good news is as of yesterday, I'm married 41 years. The question is, my ketubah is not a shit on like this one. Need to write a check.
I would write the check.